Hello everyone, this is Damien with Easy Green Screen, and in this tutorial I'm going to be discussing how to do an extraction with blonde hair from a green screen and putting that into a very bright digital background. And so this extraction was straight off of Easy Green Screen with no touch-up, and you can see the hair blends pretty well, and there were some significant challenges to this image. But it wasn't that difficult to do, and I'll show you how to make the adjustments to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you that if we sample this background, the brightness is anywhere from about 90 to 100% brightness. So I mean, it's getting close to being pure white. And extracting blonde hair and putting on a pure white background is probably the most difficult extraction of all to do. And so what I'm going to do now is undo the Easy Green Screen extraction and just start with the original image. And I want to discuss a few of the things that are going to be challenging in this image. So the first thing I'm going to show you is that we've got a 24 megapixel image, so it's 4,000 pixels across and it's 6,000 pixels tall. However, even though it's a 24 megapixel image, the actual resolution in the hair is pretty low because this is a full body shot and then the person is zoomed out in the image. And so when we actually zoom in to the hair, I'm going to grab a ruler tool, and what I like to do is measure across from the edge of the ear to the edge of the ear just to see how much resolution we have in the hair. And we see in this image we've got 480 pixels across. A general rule is that if you have 2,000 pixels when you measure across from the edge of the ear to the edge of the ear, at that point the width of a single strand of hair is roughly the width of 1 pixel in your image. And so since we have 480, the width of a single strand of hair is actually a little bit less than 25% the width of 1 pixel. And another general rule that I use is I like to see that value be at least 600 pixels. And at 600 pixels, that makes the width of a strand of hair 0.3 pixels wide. And that's usually the breaking point that I consider. Once the hair gets smaller than that, it makes it very difficult to extract and keep detail. And if I zoom in to show you here what I'm talking about, we see these single strands of hair. These hairs are actually about 1/4 of a pixel wide, and of course the camera is going to have some slight blurring. Nothing is ever perfect focus, but even assuming if it was perfect focus in the entire image, 80%, 75 to 80% of that information in those pixels is coming from the background, and only a slight majority or a slight amount of that information is coming from the hair. So if we sample these pixels, you can see that they're pure green. You can see the saturation is 100% with a hue of 138 there. I mean, so that's pretty much pure green. The only thing we see is that even though they're pure green, you see a slight shift in the brightness values in those pixels. So when we zoom way out, our eyes perceive these single strands of hair, but in reality, these are very green. So what the software has to do is it has to make these partially transparent, so you will see the new background showing through in the same way that the green screen shows through. And that's going to make the extraction blend well. And as the resolution becomes smaller and smaller, that becomes more difficult for the software to do. And in addition to that, if we sample this green screen, we see that the brightness value is around 63%. The brightness of that background, remember, was 90 to 100%. So what happens is if we are blending this with partial transparency, the mask itself, it does not do anything to the luminosity. So we're going to be carrying over some of the luminosity of this screen. So even after we remove the green cast, the new background is brighter, so these hairs might appear too dark against that new background, if that makes sense. It'll make more sense once we do this extraction and you can see more what I'm talking about. So the other thing that can be challenging, and I'll show you here, is in the red channel you can see that the screen is pure black. Now this is an sRGB image, and what can happen with sRGB is because that green is highly saturated, it can actually become out of gamut, and so you actually lose detail in that red channel. Now Easy Green Screen, especially with blonde hair, it uses this red channel information to try to restore the edges of this hair. And you can see the green channel, there's no channel clipping, but we don't have a lot of contrast information in the hair. And the blue channel is pretty noisy, and that's typical. That the blue channel is usually the most noisy of the three channels. Now one thing you can do is, if you shot in RAW, you could convert your RAW image to Adobe 1998, and when you do that, you usually don't get this channel clipping and you get more detail, and that can sometimes help you get a little bit more detail in your extractions. And you can also adjust your RAW settings so you don't get this channel clipping. However, you can usually get a pretty decent extraction even if you have the channel clipping in just the green channel. So we're going to do the extraction with the channel clipped like it is, and we'll just take a look at the results. So the first thing I'm going to do this extraction is I'm actually going to crop off the area that we don't want in the foreground, or just crop off anything that's not behind the green screen. And so I'll then show you here, if we look at our image size, we started with a 24 megapixel image, which was 6,000 pixels by 4,000. After we crop, we're down to a little under 7 megapixels, so 1800 across by 3500 down. So 6 point some megapixels. And this is important to point out, because if you don't need those areas outside where we cropped, if you were to zoom in with your camera and keep as much of the resolution as you can try to use all of your camera's resolution, which really helps if you're trying to extract fine strands of hair, because now the hairs are physically larger in your image and it really helps with the extractions. So after we're cropped, I'm going to now make a selection around the hair. We're going to be doing this in dual mask mode. Now you can make this selection beforehand and then run Easy Green Screen, or you can just select dual mask and Easy Green Screen and it's going to prompt you to make this selection. Now you notice that I didn't include the edges of the skin in the selection, because I don't want those to use the hair mask settings. I want to only use the hair mask settings for the edges of the hair, so that's why I made the selection the way I did. I might grab a little bit more just of this right in there to make sure we got all that hair. Anyway, I'm getting a little too picky with the selection here. Let's just extract this. So overall, the extraction looks pretty good initially, and I'm going to show you against 50% gray. If we zoom in, the hair actually doesn't look too bad. And then if we put in our background though, I'm going to go to the composition menu, and we're going to add that background. Once we add this really bright background, and I'm going to position this first and then we'll zoom in and look at the hair. Now with this really bright background in place, you can see the edges of the hair. And then if we look, they're kind of dark and they're kind of rough and pixelated. Now if we look at the mask, if you remember when we looked at the red channel, this looks an awful lot like that red channel looked on the edges. So that could have caused it to not be able to get quite as much detail in the extraction. You can maybe get some more of that back if you use Adobe 1998 in your extractions, but not always. So what we're going to do now is, now that we're back in, we're in our composition menu, I'm going to go to the mask settings. And in the mask settings, if you remember when I was talking about the red channel, this light hair recovery, this is strongly tied to the red channel. I'm just going to turn this all the way off. I'll do that again because I didn't quite get it all the way down before I let go. Anyways, now it's all the way down, and if we look against the background, you can see it doesn't look quite as bad, but still the edges of the hair don't blend really well. And I'm going to try to get some more detail back in this hair. So I'm going to turn this smart radius up to 100. Now the smart radius doesn't always work well with blonde hair. You're going to have to try it with your images. It's hit and miss. Sometimes your images look better if you turn the smart radius off and you turn the light hair recovery up. It really just depends on the information in your individual image. But for this image, I think the smart radius getting turned up actually is going to look okay when we're done. And I'm going to view the mask just so you can see what happens here. I'm going to turn this mode from blend to replace. And you can see that that gives the hair more of a transparent look to it. So I'll explain what this does. Is when you're in replace mode, it's going to take the edges of your image and ignore the easy green screen algorithm and completely replace that with Photoshop's smart radius algorithm. So it runs this with smart radius and replaces the area in your hair mask region that we selected. It completely replaces that with Photoshop's smart radius calculations. What can happen sometimes is that can start encroaching in and making the pixels inwards look a little bit semi-transparent. Like up here, we don't want those transparent, but against the background, we're really not going to notice that slight bit of transparency. And if you notice, when we go to blend mode, this uses the opacity information from both Easy Green Screen's native mask channel and Photoshop Smart Radius. So it pretty much adds those masks together so you get foreground information from both. So in any case, I'm just going to cover the changes we made here. I turned the light hair recovery down to 1, the Smart Radius up to 100, and changed the mode to replace from blend. Those are the 3 adjustments I made to the hair. Now if we look at it against the background, it starts to blend a little bit better, but there's a final touch that's going to really finish this to make it look good. And so what we're going to do is go into the edge hair coloring. Now for blonde hair, we extracted that off of the green screen. And remember when I mentioned the green screen was pretty dark? Or not, it was darker than the background. So the edges of these hairs are too dark in this case with that background. If we look at it against the color, against 50% gray, it looks pretty good. Against that bright color background, it looks too dark. So what we can do is just simply turn up the brightness to the edge hair. I'll go up to 50% here. And that really just blends those into the background. And you can adjust this as needed. But I think in this image, I really just want to blend these into the background. And what you can also do is you can force color into the edge of your hair as well. So I'm going to turn the edge color opacity up to 50%. And the default color usually works pretty well because it blends with color blend mode. I'm going to turn the width of that also up to 15 pixels. But if you want to fine tune the color that it blends, if I select change hair blend color, by default it blends a hue of 25 with a saturation of 40 and a brightness of 50. Now since this is blending in color blend mode, it really doesn't matter too much how bright or dark. It's really the hue and saturation that are going to blend into it. And by just simply changing the opacity, you can usually get it to look pretty good. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually sample the hair color. Now, if you're not on Photoshop CC, you're not going to get the eyedropper tool. When I programmed this, I was only able to get Photoshop to give me this eyedropper tool for this in CC. If you're in Photoshop CS6 or CS5, you can still change the color. You're just not going to have the eyedropper to do that. So anyway, I just find a color that I think will really fine tune and make that look good. Select OK. And then one last thing I'll show you I did notice in the mask is I don't know if there were some green reflections maybe in this part of the hair, and then there could have been a few pixels that were sort of green near the eyes. Anytime you have that partial transparency and you're working with these edge hair color adjustments, that brightness shift, if those are inside your mask area, it can actually try to brighten those areas because we're brightening up. It's looking to brighten just the edges, and it will see that as an edge. I don't think it'll be very noticeable. However, I'm going to show you how we could correct for that. And we will go back into our keep and remove areas. I'm just going to select those areas and select add to foreground with spill correction. So we're keeping the spill correction. We're just forcing those areas back into the foreground. And like I say, those were probably barely transparent anyway. And it probably wouldn't have made much difference at all, if any noticeable difference. In any case, I think the extraction worked pretty well. I'm just going to apply this. So that's really all there is to it. That extraction wasn't very hard. There was just a few adjustments to make. I did do a lot of talking in the video. However, the actual extraction part and adjustments is really only a minute or two. So start using those adjustments in your images, and just once you learn how the different adjustments affect your extractions, you can do images like this in really not much time at all. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in Easy Green Screen, please be sure to visit our website. That is easygreenscreen.com.